Friday. Stop working. Stop everything. It's all done, you guys. It's Friday. Get your beer, get your wine, get your liquor, get your tea, whatever the heck you're drinking. Let's get it together. We have a great episode. And I'm Cassandra Gaines, by the way. For those of you who do not know me, I'm your host of Mad Gaines Live here on FreightWaves. We have a very exciting episode because we've been hearing a lot about FreightVana. So I know the founders of FreightVana. I love them dearly. So this episode will be a little biased. But maybe I'll give them a hard time today. But they started this company back in 2021. And it's blown up. It's done so well. And I want to create this episode so that we can talk about the growth of FreightVana, the history and where they're going, and why everybody loves them, why are they everywhere. And for those of you who don't know who they are, now you will. So I'm going to invite Don onto our show, my favorite person in the whole world, Don Everhart, who is the CTO of FreightVana. There's my amazing Don. How are you?
Hey, Cass. Hey, Cass. Good to see you today.
It's good to see you. Look at you. You got your professional mic. You've got everything all set up. You even look like you've got a lot of technology around you.
Yeah. Hey, the great thing about kind of our journey so far is that we have been kind of heavy social presence, heavy podcast, heavy media creation. So this morning I kind of socialized. I was like, yeah, hey, I'm going to be on cast this afternoon. Next thing you know, like I had people just showing up in my office. Hey, you need this softbox and here's this mic. And so yeah, they took good care of me today. So big shout out to Jesse Griffin. Absolutely clutch this morning on making sure that I had everything I needed.
I met your team and they are dynamite. I love your offices, by the way, but I think you bring up a really good topic. We're going to follow the flow I normally do with my leaders when I have them on the podcast. But first, because you brought up social media, podcasting, all that jazz, I do want to talk about it because there are many companies out there that don't want to change with the times. And they're like, no, we don't really do the social media thing. We don't really do the podcast thing. Were you guys entertaining being like that at some point in time? Or were you like, no, we want to be all podcast, all social media. This is what we're going to do. This is our brand.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting path because with our background, we came from some large organizations, several here in the Valley, right? As you look at the makeup of the folks that we have on the floor, a lot of different companies represented. And I think when we look at those companies in particular, there's been a lot of controls. And hey, in a lot of cases, they're necessary controls. You're a large publicly traded entity. You want to control the messaging around your brand specifically and how you show up in general. And we actually kind of said, as we go on this path, one, we're hiring people that we trust with our brand, right? That's what we're doing out of the gate. If you're part of FreightVana, you're part of FreightVana. You represent us in everything that you do. So we had a choice. It was, do we have a corporate controlled message where it goes through flows and, CEOs signing off on pretty much everything, all marketing, all content. We said that's not who we are. We're built on transparency and trust, and we're going to trust our people, right? So as we went through that, we said personal brands, very important, right? So you can probably, off the top of your head, list 3 or 4 different people that you've seen represent this brand throughout time. Josh Breeze is one of them. Ricky, you'll see Jesse, you'll see Lars, Shannon. I'm out doing some things, right? So we have a ton of people, and the only real rules that we put in place, because I was asked this not too long ago, is, hey, how do you control all that? And I said, well, we don't, right? The only thing that we really do is say, hey, treat it just like you would Thanksgiving with the family. Lean away from those topics that you would consider third rail items. And as long as you're doing that, just be your authentic self and represent the company well. And we've had great success with that.
I love that. You really have had great success with that. You've gotten the brand out, the messaging. Like, you guys are like the poster board for being a modern company and really growing in that way. Like, wow, with the branding.
We're trying. Yeah, for sure. But that's very kind. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I love that. So I want to back up for those of you who do not know you, because I feel like everybody knows you, but there are going to be people watching the show that do not. So how did you get into freight?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of crazy. I've been in industry for about 20 years. Don't let the baby face fool you. I started out, and it's funny because my path was a little bit weird. When I was in college, I was actually studying pre-med. And so chemistry, biology background. And then somewhere along the way, I was like, that's not it. I'm more interested in tech. So I switched over to MIS. And then as I exited, it was really like, hey, what do I want to do? Right. And I actually landed a part-time job at Averitt Express doing some customer service stuff, and eventually kind of quickly moved up there. And I was like, okay, this makes sense to me. This is problem solving. This is logic. That's all transportation systems really are, right? So as we went down that path, like, okay, if I'm going to be serious about this, I want to work somewhere that makes sense for me, that I have good upward mobility. So I actually sought out Swift Transportation at the time, and I harassed some poor recruiter until she's like, I don't know, Don, fine. Like, we've got like an ECTDM position you can do if you'll come out and interview for it. And so I went to Swift, and I was at Swift for 15 years. Held progressive roles there over, on average, probably 12 to 18 months, had a new opportunity presented, went through dedicated pricing, network, and then moved back into my true passion, which was the technology piece. And essentially did their digital platform, helped bring that to market. And then as we had this opportunity for several of us to kind of go our own way here, it was a no-brainer for me when I sat down with the founders and we had that initial discussion to go on this path with FreightVana and see if we could do things differently.
Yeah. So where were you living when you were working for Everett?
Cookeville. Yeah, I was in Cookeville, Tennessee, midway between Nashville and Knoxville.
Wow.
Small college town, right? And that happens to be where their corporate offices are based. My mother-in-law worked there at the time, and I was like, "Are you guys hiring?" Like, and I almost didn't get the job. That's the funny part. They didn't know if I was going to cut it in freight. So
that's so funny. And here you are years later, you're like a founder of a freight company now.
And we're still trying to figure out if I'm going to make it in freight or not. I mean, Shannon asked me every day, like, yeah,
I think you'll be okay, Don.
I think we'll be okay.
I think you're quite successful. Okay. So, so did you move to Arizona for the Swift role?
Absolutely. So,
wow.
I interviewed. I actually flew myself out because it was like an overnight position, right? They weren't doing relo and all of that for me, and so I actually sought it out and I said, "Hey, I can be there on Monday morning to interview." I flew out Monday morning. I was there. We met. They were like, "Yeah, sure. Like, you have the requisite knowledge to come work here in this role. Like, we'll bring you on." And went back home, and my wife and I packed it up. And I think 2 weeks later, we landed here in Arizona. So
that's
Bree
amazing.
also said to say hi to you today, Cass. So she was texting me.
I love her. Tell her
what are you doing?
hello.
Yeah, for sure.
When I saw her in San Diego, I kind of felt bad because I saw you and I was very excited, but I literally like shoved you aside and I was like, "Oh my God."
That happens.
I'm sure it terrified her a little bit.
She wins over all people. So
she's great like that. So are you, though. So, I love this, like a true hustler story, getting you a foot in the door in Swift, and even Everett too. It was like a nice hustler story. So when people complain to you about tough markets or I can't find a job or blah blah blah, you're probably like, let me tell you.
They're all tough markets. They're all tough markets. The good markets are tough.
So true.
The hard markets are tough. Like I've had the advantage of seeing enough market cycles that practically nothing surprises me at this point, much like a lot of our professionals that have been in this industry for 10, 20, 30 years, right? There's never a surprise. It's more about how long do those challenges last at any given time as we're moving through it.
Damn, that's such a good point. Is that even we've been in I guess, depending on whose perspective, of course, but if you're a logistics provider, this has been a pretty good market for the last 2 years, last year and a half, but it's still been very tough. And
Yeah.
so I guess you bring up a really good point that they are tough markets. You gotta be
really,
good
Cass,
with that.
That brings us back to FreightVana's reason for being, right? Like, people ask me all the time, why FreightVana? Like, what's FreightVana's mission? And really, when we think about it, we like to socialize. Hey, like, our mission is truly to become the most trusted 3PL in the nation, right? And the way you do that isn't operating even how we've operated in the past. There were things about that system that we didn't like. It was the adversarial relationships between the broker and the carrier, and the broker and the customer, and or I'm sorry, the shipper in that case, right? Riding that volatility wave. And what's funny is when you sit down and you go, hey, level set, net new, like, what are we all really trying to accomplish, right? And everybody just wants to be treated fairly, and they want to trust that they're being treated fairly. So when we talk about transparency, we don't talk about transparency just in, like, that's not like a cost plus, hey, take a look at this, like, there's your number. It's transparency with accountability, right? It's how are we acting in each other's best interests? Like, how are we representing? And then how do we stop living in this space where, as a broker, yes, it's our job to be an intermediary, but I think for so long we've spent time kind of holding those parties at arm's length. And we just said, hey, what would happen if we truly brought people together? What if our shipper knew who our carrier was? What if our carrier knew who our shipper was? What if we could share differently, right? Like, and that's one of the things that we really hinge on is giving differently and getting differently. We understand that to truly build trust, you have to extend it very quickly, right? Which a lot of us are not used to doing.
No,
but then
not at all.
It gets reciprocated. And when it gets reciprocated and you gain that trust, you protect it at all costs. And you do that through having reasonable conversations and being close. Like, how many of your shippers do you talk to on Teams on a daily basis versus a phone call? Like, how many times do you check in with them just to see, how they're doing that day? And it's not always a solicitation call. It's about being actual partners in the process. So that's one of our key reasons for being.
That's interesting that you brought that up, because I have a friend that I was speaking to, and she's a little bit new in this industry, and she told me that the most surprising thing about this industry is that shippers, brokers, and carriers will say that they're going to price something one way, or we promise you for 1 year we're going to give you these lanes at this price, or we promise you for 1 year we're going to give you these lanes in this volume. And within a few months, they could, or 6 months or whatever, they could take all those promises back. And it's almost expected in our industry. And honoring your word is not something that is consistent in our industry. And she said that was like one of the most surprising things she learned. And, we saw a lot of that in COVID. We see a lot of that whenever we have a news cycle. And I think it's a really important point to make. And also, I can see why you say to extend trust, it's really difficult for people, especially in our industry. And it's a really
Absolutely.
great point. I hope.
Yeah. And so I've got a little bit of a story about that, right? So I've got a procurement manager that I worked with at let's call him a Fortune 10 shipper, right? Did a lot of business with him in the past. And in the past, that's really when I was kind of engaged with him, is when I was in that pricing role. And I had a really, really good relationship with my procurement manager, or my carrier manager, however you wanted to think about it at the time, right? But it's interesting because I always joked, I was like, hey, you and I, we're friends 11 months out of the year. Like, I know what's going on with your family, you know what's going on with my family. Like, I was like, but there's this month where we are adversaries and we're trying to play gotcha. I'm like, can we not just be honest? He's like, you know what? Hey, we're going to try this. And it's funny because we get to that next bid cycle and he's like, hey, I remember kind of our conversation. Like, so we're going to go one round on this, right? And he's like, I need best foot forward. Like, that's where we're at. Well, I know the org, and I know that that's not how they run procurement, even if that was his intent. And I'm like, so I kind of put my stuff together. And this is a case where I also wasn't able to do what I would prefer to do, which is act in a trusted way. So I put my stuff forward, and he comes back and he's like, hey, like that was aggressive and it was good. We're going 3 rounds. And I'm like, yeah, I knew you were. And that's why my rate is where it's at. My final rate's actually going to be this. And he's like, well, I thought we were going to, I was like, yeah, but you also just did it to me, right? Like, so how?
Yeah.
And he goes, well, that's how our 2 companies have to operate with each other. So that has been a cornerstone of some of the conversations that we have here is we're not going to show up in this way. We're going to act in a trusted fashion. And when we can, and if we have partners that don't act in that same way with us, then we're probably not the best partners for each other. So we acknowledge that and we move forward. And hey, it's been great so far. We've had great growth. We're excited about where we sit in our first year, and our prospects as we kind of transition in 23, even in the soft market, and it's probably going to remain this way for a little while, like with all indicators that we're seeing and those that we talk to in industry. But we like our chances for sure.
For those of you just joining us, we're talking to Don Everhart, oh my goodness, from FreightVana. And FreightVana was founded in 2021, but they have grown, and almost everybody knows who they are and love them, which is often a difficult thing to achieve, is because people get really competitive when you start growing. And people start, getting angry or competitive, and they treat you a certain way, and you become often hated. But you guys have found a good balance. Why do you think that is?
So I think it's just in how we show up, right? It's about the authenticity. It's funny that you should mention that you get to this point where maybe it's less trusted between parties and competitors. I'll tell you, some of our best friends are our largest competitors. In fact, and this is where maybe understanding our business a little bit differently is, so under the FreightVana umbrella, we actually have 3 distinct entities that live. We have FreightVana Logistics, which is our logistics brokerage arm. That's where we run our asset light FEX offering. Then we have FV Technologies, and that's the area that I head up specifically. That's our SaaS software and our really organizing the world of freight tech. We get really close to our shippers in this regard. And then we have FV Advisory Group, where that's buy side and sell side engagements for taking truckload carriers to market. A lot of these guys and gals have spent decades building fantastic businesses, and they don't really have a succession plan for it. And so John, specifically with his background, helps take them to market and maximize their value as those get shopped. So that's kind of the lay of the land, right? But it's funny that you should mention kind of our competitors, because from an FV Technologies perspective, that organizing freight tech, and you may have some watching this right now, like we have, I've had folks be like, Don, like, I wish we could work with you, or wish we had this specific piece of tech. Like, we engage today with other 3PLs, with carriers, with shippers. It's one of the nice things about getting close to shippers is really when you're talking to them about their technology needs and as they're trying to navigate this world, they end up in a spot where they're like, hey, I don't have the time. I'm undermanned. I'm undergunned. Like, how do I even think about this? Like, no, I don't have an EDI system. Yes, I still print stuff via BOL. And I'm not always necessarily selling our solution, right? Like, we have a reasonable view of the landscape of what's out there in freight tech. And I've probably made 8 referrals this week from engagements to other companies that can better serve them on specific freight tech needs. And our customers love that. They love how we ask them to treat us as an extension of their team. We demonstrate firewalls to help navigate that. And then we just show up and solution together. It's a lot of our early calls with a customer is, yes, there's freight, but then immediately behind that, we're typically having some type of technology conversation where we're ideating on, hey, like, what challenges are you seeing? Like, what's your connectivity issues? Who are you using? Are you seeing that as a net positive, or is the tech actually slowing you down in some way, right? And it's been great so far. So there's absolutely demand for it in the market.
That's really cool that you guys have designed FreightVana that way. It makes a lot of sense too. I will tell people that, as many of you know, I own a tech company, and I have gone to Don quite a bit and his team for help and advisory. And there have been times where you have referred me to other people, but there have been times where you've been very valuable in helping us with what we need. So definitely something I need people to listen to Don when he says. He's got a lot of experience, and so does his team. So if you guys are stuck on something with regards to, at least I'm coming from my own personal direction with regards to transportation industry, tech related issues. I mean, he literally, sometimes it could be a 5-minute phone call and he could change the way you do business. So
I appreciate that.
And it comes from so much years of experience you've had, and so is your team.
I mean,
and I think you list that as like a reason. Like, I think I saw on LinkedIn on your about section, you say like over 200 years of experience. I'm assuming you added it up along the team. But
so that was day one.
Sorry,
that was day one experience. No, that was day one experience. So it's fun because as we were hiring people, we would kind of write their years in industry, and we'd strike it out and add it back up. And when we got to about 300 years, we actually stopped writing it down because it was becoming a little cumbersome. So that actually got framed when we moved offices, and it's hanging out there. You're welcome to see those initials anytime that you visit. And hey, that's another thing. We welcome people to visit us, right? Shippers, carriers,
and
other
people
brokers.
do.
Like we play nice in the industry. We kind of like everyone. It's a big ocean. There's plenty of freight for us to share. Most of the time there's plenty of freight for us to share. We welcome folks to, just shoot us a note. We'll set up time for you to come by, and you're welcome to come by and kind of see us, learn what we're doing and how we can engage, right? And
I love your office. I've been there. I've seen lots of people there. I love it.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a weird question for you, by the way.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Anything I didn't like, Shannon did it.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll blame it all on Shannon. So how has it been going working side by side with Shannon? Has there been times where you're like, man, I really want to punch you in the face right now, but that goes against our values?
Well, you have that in anything, right? What I would say is, no, I don't regret a single day here, right? My best days or my worst days here are better than my best days in other places, right? It's great having Shannon and John here from an executive perspective and how we engage. And I think I smile when you say punch each other in the face, because it's not necessarily that as much as we are not afraid to put an idea on the table and beat it up, right? We're not going to lean away from difficult conversations just because they're difficult. We embrace conflict. In fact, that's one of our values. Like, I was looking around for a value card that I had laying on my desk, but embrace conflict is one of our core principles tied off to one of our values, right? So, like any team, we have conflict because business is difficult. Business has conflict in it, and you want to make sure that you're making the right decisions as you move along. We ask ourselves every day, right? We know what we wanted to do differently, so we end up challenging ourselves on, are we actually doing it differently, or are we falling into patterns because that's what we know, right? You get a lot of muscle memory over a period of time. So how do you kind of re-engage? We don't necessarily like calling it reprogramming. We talk about it in terms of programming. Like, let's program for the right outcome, not try to reset some other thing. Let's actually go from a blank sheet of paper and figure out where we want to be. So,
that's smart.
Yeah, it's been great. I love working with these guys. We right before this, having strategy sessions all morning, went and had a bite with Shannon for right across the street for a quick bite before the show, and covered some stuff there. Like, we're on 24/7, it feels like. So, and we're all committed to the growth that we expect here and the outcomes for what was 21 day one employees, and now is we're not quite there, but we're approaching 100 employees. right? So that in a 18-month period, a 5x growth on employee count. We won't talk about
That's amazing.
Revenues or any of that stuff, but because we just don't disclose. But it's been great, and we've got a really good team here. We're excited to see what we do in the years to come.
I'm excited too, and I really I loved visiting your office. I love seeing what you guys are doing on social media. I do have a couple weird questions for you.
I love weird questions. I would expect nothing less. Yeah.
So one, which do you prefer? No bacon, bacon undercooked and soft, or crispy bacon?
Ooh, crispy bacon. It has to be practically burnt, honestly.
Do you hear that, boiler room boys? Do you hear that?
Why is my bacon flimsy? I need my bacon with some structure to it. Yeah, exactly.
Hold on a second, Tony. See that? No scrapes, no scuffs.